Logan Meyer stepped into his kitchen just after sunset, the scent of pine and leather from his workshop still clinging to his clothes. He wasn't expecting much, maybe leftover stew or a passive-aggressive sticky note from Alicia about tracking sawdust on the floor. Instead, there was a torn utility bill on the counter, her handwriting scrawled across the back. "I'm done with you and your pathetic dreams. This house is sold. I'm taking everything. Enjoy what's left." No signature, just a clean break, served cold. Logan stared at it for a full minute, letting the silence wrap tight around him. He didn't panic. No yelling, no pacing, just a long, steady breath. Alicia thought this would be the moment that broke him, but it wasn't. It was confirmation. Confirmation of every quiet suspicion, every withdrawn glance, every hushed call she'd taken in the bathroom. She hadn't just left. She'd tried to erase him with a Sharpie and a smirk. Logan folded the note in half, then again, tucking it into the back pocket of his wallet like evidence. She thought she'd taken everything. She had no idea what he'd already taken back. He reached for his phone and typed a message. "It's time." She made her move. It went to Ethan, his oldest friend, and the attorney who'd helped him prepare for this exact scenario. Then Logan poured himself a cup of coffee, black, and walked to the window. Outside, the mountains were fading into dusk, and the wind rustled through the tall Arizona pines. It should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like permission. Alicia had burned the bridge, but Logan had already built a new one in the shadows. She thought she'd blindsided him, but this war? He'd been ready. The cracks had started quietly, almost politely. Elisa's long business trips to Phoenix used to come with souvenirs and late-night phone calls. Lately, they came with silence and receipts that didn't match the calendar. Logan noticed how she'd flinch when he asked innocent questions, how she suddenly had meetings that couldn't be named and colleagues that didn't have last names. He'd come to bed with sawdust still on his arms, only to find her turned away, pretending to sleep. When he'd ask if something was wrong, she'd sigh and call him paranoid, accuse him of projecting. That word stuck with him, projecting, as if concern were a character flaw, as if suspicion meant guilt. Then came the dismissal. Her tone changed from cool to condescending. "You're still making belts, huh?" she'd said one evening at a party, loud enough for her coworkers to hear. "Logan's workshop is adorable," she'd added with a brittle smile, like his entire livelihood was a craft fair booth. It wasn't always like this. She'd once brought him coffee during his late nights tooling leather and called his pieces art. But lately, she talked about his business the way people talk about hobbies they hope you outgrow. Logan said nothing in the moment, but he remembered. He always remembered. The final shift came the day he overheard her on the phone. She was in the laundry room, half whispering, half laughing. "He still thinks I'm doing this for us." She never noticed him standing there. That night, Logan lay awake while Alicia scrolled through real estate listings on her iPad, eyes glowing in the dark. He didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, he picked up a notebook and started writing everything down. Expenses, odd behaviors, phrases she thought he wouldn't remember. The foundation of their marriage hadn't cracked. It had been quietly, efficiently dismantled. And now he was finally seeing the blueprint. Logan didn't react with rage when he realized Alicia was slipping away. He responded with discipline. While she played her game of secrecy and superiority, he played one of documentation and silence. Every receipt, every transaction, every late night. Business dinner went into a locked drawer in his studio. He updated his inventory system, separated his business finances, and opened a new bank account under his name only. Quietly, steadily, he began pulling his savings from the joint account, dollar by dollar, until it was dry. Alicia never noticed. She was too busy looking over his shoulder, never beneath his feet. He called his sister Jasmine, a regional bank compliance officer, and asked her to look into a few routing numbers. Her voice went tight when she called him back. "She's been moving money, Logan, lots of it, all routed into a secondary account you're not listed on." That night, he met Ethan at a dive bar on the edge of town. Over whiskey and unspoken history, he handed over every file, every spreadsheet. "I don't want revenge," Logan said. "I want out. Clean, prepared." Ethan smiled. "Good. because we're going to bury her in paperwork before she ever smells smoke. The next step was the house. During a recent renovation, one Alicia was too busy to show up for, Logan had refinanced the property under his name alone. She hadn't even read the documents she'd signed. "Just handle it," she'd said, distracted by a phone call as she scribbled her signature. He'd handled it. Not just the refinance, but also the removal of her name from the deed. All wrapped in legal compliance, notarized and filed. On paper, the home was his. Alicia had no idea. She thought she still held the title. She didn't even hold the keys anymore. Logan's studio became more than a workspace. It was his war room. While Alicia took selfies in Scottsdale restaurants, Logan sharpened his strategy. He installed cameras, upgraded locks, and backed up every file. She believed he was slow, that he lacked ambition. But the truth was, she'd mistaken his stillness for weakness. He wasn't idle, he was patient. And patience, he knew, was lethal when underestimated. The storm wasn't coming. It had already started. She just hadn't looked up yet. The morning after the note, Logan woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, but not empty. Her absence lingered like perfume and condescension. He didn't call her. He didn't drive to her office or send a furious text. There was no begging, no demand for closure. She expected him to fall apart, to confront her with righteous anger. But Logan knew better. Confrontation was what she craved. Drama gave her control. Instead, he let the silence speak. He fed the dog, swept the porch, and folded laundry, all while sipping coffee like it was any other Thursday. By noon, he had already moved forward. Ethan filed the first round of motions, property injunctions, asset freezes, and a formal divorce petition. Jasmine flagged Alicia's most recent transfers, triggering a review by her employer's ethics board. Logan didn't gloat. He didn't post cryptic messages online or change the locks just yet. Every move he made was silent, measured, legal. She'd made her exit with a Sharpie and bravado. He would answer with law and ink. In the absence of confrontation, Logan found clarity. She wanted a fight. Instead, she got a chess game, and he'd already captured her queen. Later that evening, Logan stood in the doorway of his studio, staring at a half-finished satchel on the workbench. The tools were arranged neatly, untouched. For the first time in months, he exhaled without tension. He knew Alicia was waiting for chaos, but there was nothing. No call, no explosion. Just the echo of her own choices bouncing through an empty house. The confrontation she expected never came, because Logan wasn't playing by her rules anymore. He was rewriting them, quietly, methodically, and with full control. Within 48 hours of Alicia's note, the first legal domino fell. Ethan, ever precise, filed an emergency motion to freeze all joint accounts and assets under suspicion of misconduct. By noon, Alicia's unauthorized transfers were flagged, her access revoked, and her solo account pinged for review. The house? Locked. The title deed was already in Logan's name thanks to that renovation meeting she skipped. It wasn't revenge, it was structure. Logan didn't want to destroy Alicia. He just wanted to make sure she couldn't burn down what he had built while she was busy chasing her next chapter. Ethan delivered the paperwork in person to her firm's corporate office, dressed in a tailored gray suit with a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You might want to tell your client to slow down," he told Alicia's lawyer. "She's sprinting into a courtroom without realizing she's barefoot." Meanwhile, Jasmine filed a formal report with her bank's fraud division. A compliance officer herself, she knew exactly which threads to tug to unravel the pattern. Alicia wasn't just sloppy, she was arrogant. And arrogance was traceable, especially when she believed no one was watching. That same day, Logan received a call from Tom Delgado, the real estate agent Alicia had roped into listing the house. "Hey man, this is awkward, but your wife said the house was good to go. Papers signed and everything." Logan calmly explained the truth. She had no authority, no title rights, and no ability to sell anything. Tom went silent. "Well, she's going to be real embarrassed." Logan didn't smile. He didn't need to. The embarrassment was already en route, wrapped in legal language and stamped by the county clerk. At home, Logan prepared a file labeled Exit Strategy. It held receipts, screenshots, notarized documents, and timelines. No rage. No revenge fantasies. Just precision. Alicia had written a note like she was flipping a switch. What she hadn't realized was that Logan had rewired the whole circuit. She thought she held the board, but now the king was protected, the rook was in position, and her queen already cornered. The game was still on, but Logan was the only one who knew the rules. Alicia came back on a Monday. Logan had just returned from the farmer's market, arms full of coffee and leather dye, when her BMW screeched into the driveway like she still owned the place. She marched through the front door without knocking, fury carved into every step. "Why is the house sale on hold?" she barked. "Tom says there's an issue with the paperwork." Logan set the groceries down calmly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "No issue. You never owned the house." Her jaw twitched. "That's not possible. I signed the documents." He nodded. "You signed them, yes, during the refinance, under my name. You were too busy on a conference call to read them." The shift in her face was immediate. Shock to disbelief to rage. "You tricked me," she hissed. Logan raised an eyebrow. "No, you handed it to me. You just never cared enough to check." She started pacing the living room like a caged animal, muttering about legal rights and her name being on the marriage license. That's when Logan walked over to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Inside, printed bank statements, flagged with withdrawals, screenshots of her hidden account activity. "We can talk facts or we can let our lawyers do it," he said quietly. Alicia went pale. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You've been spying on me?" Logan shook his head. "I've been protecting myself." She sank onto the couch, suddenly small in the space she used to dominate. "You can't just shut me out." Logan exhaled, slow and steady. "Alicia, you shut yourself out the moment you started treating me like a liability." There was no screaming, no dramatic exit, just Alicia, hollow-eyed and cornered. Logan didn't yell. He didn't need to. The facts were loud enough. Logan waited until Alicia had run out of excuses, outbursts, and empty threats. When she finally muttered, "You don't have proof," he calmly slid the last folder across the table. Inside were photos clear tampered, of Alicia and a younger man from her office, candlelit dinners, weekend getaways during her so-called conferences. The final photo? The two of them outside a cabin Alicia had once promised to buy with Logan. She stared at it in silence, color draining from her face. "This isn't what it looks like," she whispered. Logan didn't bother replying. Her reaction confirmed everything. He stood up, walking slowly to the cabinet where he kept the security drive. "There's more," he said, placing it gently next to the folder. "Camera footage. Your voice. Conversations you didn't think anyone would hear." Alicia didn't even reach for it. Her hands stayed folded, trembling slightly in her lap. The confrontation she thought she was prepared for had turned into a deposition for tension, and Logan was the only one speaking in complete sentences. "You spent months treating me like a fool," he said, "but I wasn't blind. I was quiet. There's a difference." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, for maybe the first time in years. "You planned this," she said, her voice flat. Logan nodded. "No, you did. I just made sure I was ready." That was the final blow. Not the photos, not the files, not even the divorce paperwork already in Ethan's hands. It was the realization that she hadn't outsmarted him. She'd underestimated him. Alicia had written her exit like a power move, but Logan had rewritten the ending. And this time, he was the one closing the door. The day Alicia moved out, Logan didn't throw a party or pop champagne. He sat in his studio with the door open, letting the breeze move through the space like a blessing. The silence was different now, not heavy, not haunted, just still. The air felt lighter without her presence, without the constant need to defend his work, his time, his worth. He finished a belt he'd started weeks ago, his hands moving without distraction. For the first time in years, there was no one telling him he was wasting his life. That evening, he stood in the middle of the living room and just looked around. Her designer candles, the abstract prints she'd insisted on, even the glass vase he'd never liked, gone. In their place, the walls felt like his again. He made a simple dinner, ate on the porch, and watched the sun dip behind the pines. No noise, no guilt, no tension stretching across the table, just quiet. Solitude, he realized, wasn't loneliness. It was space. Space to breathe. Space to exist without apology. Later that night, Logan lit a fire on the hearth and curled up in the chair Alicia used to claim was too rustic. With a sketch pad in his lap and the dog at his feet, he drew ideas for a new leather collection. He wasn't thinking about proving her wrong or showing the world he'd survived. He just felt free. And freedom, he realized, didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived in moments like this. Uncomplicated, earned, and finally his. With Alicia gone, Logan poured himself into his work, not to escape, but to rebuild. Orders from his online store picked up fast, sparked by a feature in a regional magazine that had once overlooked him. The journalist, intrigued by his handcrafted approach and the quiet resilience in his story, called him a throwback to craftsmen who build more than products. They build legacy. Logan didn't brag. He just got back to the bench. His hands, once tightened by stress, now moved with ease across the leather. Burnishing edges, stitching lines, breathing life back into something that felt wholly his. He turned Alicia's old home office into a studio expansion. Sunlight poured through the windows as he reorganized the space. New tools, custom shelves, a corner for sketches. He bought the antique stitching horse he'd been eyeing for 2 years without asking anyone's opinion. The space felt sacred, intentional. And for the first time in a long time, Logan felt like a man no longer waiting for approval. He also hired 2 part-time apprentices, young, hungry, respectful. One of them, a single dad, reminded Logan of himself, tired but hopeful. Logan paid them fairly, taught them patiently, watched them thrive. His customers wrote in, thanking him for belts that felt like armor, and journals that held grief and grace in equal parts. Logan never advertised pain, but somehow, his pieces carried stories others could feel, the very thing Alicia mocked. His so-called hobby had become the heartbeat of his future, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because when you finally stop shrinking, your craft becomes something more than survival. It becomes truth, and Logan had never been more honest. Logan didn't chase headlines or try to prove anything to those who doubted him. Instead, he focused on building something that would outlast his name. Something rooted in purpose, not pride. He began teaching leathercraft at the local arts center every Thursday night. The classes filled quickly, mostly with people starting over, retirees, young parents, veterans. Logan greeted each one the same, with respect, patience, and the belief that hands could heal what hearts had carried too long. During one class, a woman shared that her ex mocked her for starting a candle business. Logan nodded. "That's usually how you know you're onto something," he said, gently guiding her hand across a stitching awl. The room laughed quietly, but she smiled differently, like someone who'd just heard permission. These weren't just workshops, they were sanctuaries. Spaces where people weren't dismissed for dreaming, spaces Logan never had when he was fighting to be taken seriously. He didn't care about having his name etched into some grand legacy. What mattered was the ripple effect, how one quiet act of perseverance could inspire another. Legacy, he realized, wasn't built through noise or ego. It was built through moments, teaching a craft, listening without judgment, creating beauty from pressure. Alicia had chased status. Logan instead was building something humbler and far more lasting. A life that mattered not because of who applauded it, but because of who quietly learned from it. One quiet morning, while sorting through emails for a custom order, Logan saw a name he hadn't read in months. Alicia Myers. The subject line was empty. He hesitated for a moment before clicking. Inside was a single paragraph. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize how much you did for us until it was too late. I hope you're doing well. No explanations, no excuses. Just a late attempt at acknowledgement." Logan read it twice, not out of hope, but out of habit. Then, without a second thought, he moved it to trash. Closure didn't live in her words anymore. He sat back in his chair, sunlight warming the wood grain of his desk. The studio smelled like saddle soap and cedar. Outside, wind rustled through the pines. Alicia's message didn't stir anger or sadness. It stirred nothing. He'd already buried the version of himself who needed her approval. She had written him off once like he was disposable. But now, it was Logan who held the pen. He smiled softly, turned back to his workbench, and began sketching a new design. Some messages are meant to be read. Others, just reminders of how far you've come. The belt Logan finished that night wasn't for a customer. It was for himself. A deep espresso brown, burnished by hand, edges smooth, buckles solid brass. Inside, on the underside of the leather, where no one else would see, he stamped a phrase in tiny block letters. Still standing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't revenge. It was a mark of survival, a quiet declaration that every blow he'd absorbed had been folded, stitched, and shaped into something strong. He ran his fingers over the text, feeling the ridges like the emotional calluses he'd earned along the way. He thought back to the man he used to be, careful, muted, always calculating how small he had to make himself to keep the peace. The jokes he'd let slide, the sacrifices he'd made without credit, the rooms he'd shrunk in to make her feel big. That man was gone. In his place stood someone rebuilt, scarred but sturdy. He didn't wear bitterness like armor. He wore self-respect. Not loud but lasting. And he owed that not to Elise's cruelty, but to his own courage for finally walking out of her shadow. Some people leave bruises, others leave reminders. Alicia had left both, but Logan had chosen what to do with them. He didn't just heal, he transformed. Not with noise or spectacle, but with patience, purpose, and work. Real work. The kind that takes shape in silence and stays long after applause ends. That's what she never understood. It wasn't the house, the money, or even the marriage he mourned. It was the time he lost not believing in himself. And now, with every belt, every stitch, every class he taught, he reclaimed that time. One scar, one lesson, one legacy at a time. Betrayal didn't break Logan. It revealed him. For years, he'd been told that quiet meant weak, that dreams without titles weren't real, and that love meant shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. But when the mask fell and the storm hit, it wasn't rage that saved him. It was preparation, self-respect. He didn't need revenge, he needed clarity. And once he saw who he was without her shadow, he realized he'd never been small. He'd just been standing in someone else's frame. The moment he stopped seeking her approval was the moment he stepped into his own life. Now, when Logan teaches others, when he speaks to those rebuilding from doubt, dismissal, or betrayal, he doesn't preach power, he teaches strength, the quiet kind, the kind that builds in notebooks, in long silences, in one firm step at a time. You don't always get to choose how someone exits your life, but you always get to choose how you rebuild after they do. Logan didn't just survive being underestimated. He rewrote what it means to be steady, to be skilled, to be seen. And in doing so, he proved that the most powerful kind of success isn't loud. It's lived, authentically, unapologetically, quietly strong.